Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome to my channel.
30,
As for this video, we finally have a new CPU comparison, this time with the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D versus the Ryzen 5 7500F. And in the mix, just in the name of science of course, because then we have more data, I also included the Ryzen 5 7600X. So 5700X 3D versus 7500F versus 7600X. And by the way, I want to thank AMD for sending the 7500F. I reached out to them to see if they could send the CPU, and they did, so thank you very much, otherwise I would need to spend more money, so it's a win-win situation, thank you. Now back to the topic, you might be asking yourself why testing Zen 4 6 cores 12 thread CPUs versus the 5700X 3D, and the main reason is pricing, because both the 7500F and the 7600X are currently at lower price CPU versus CPU. We are not taking into account of course the platform costs, we'll talk about that in the end, but CPU versus CPU, both the 7600X and the 75, especially the 7500F, are way less expensive than the 5700X 3D. So in case you're upgrading or making a new build, which one should you pick? Well, let's start with the pricing. But before, today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Now once again, pricing. Starting with American prices, we have the 5700X 3D at $229, which is not bad for an X 3D chip, but at the same time it is from the previous generation, so yeah. As for the 7500F, well, in America you can't actually find it in many stores, but you can buy one from eBay and it will cost you like $163, so $80 or $70, let's say $70 less than the 5700X 3D. And then we have the 7600X for $207 if you want that store warranty, and still you have it $22 cheaper than the 5700X 3D. As for the European prices, we have the 5700X 3D at €227, so basically the same price as in America. Then we have the 7500F, then in Europe we can buy it in most stores, in Portuguese ones, Spanish ones and so on, and we have it for €166. And then we have the 7600X for €195. So in between the 7500F and the 5700X 3D in terms of pricing. Which one is really faster for both productivity and gaming? Let's go into it. Since more and more reviewers seem to ignore productivity benchmarks for CPUs and especially GPUs, here we are starting with Photoshop 2024, where the 7000 series CPUs are just stomping over the 5700X 3D. And I believe this happens as Photoshop loves single-core performance. In terms of percentages, the 7600X is 26% faster than the 5700X 3D, and even the 7500F is 18% faster at stock and 25% faster when manually overclocked, which is a lot for a cheaper CPU. With Premiere 2024 things are more or less the same, as we get both AMD 5 CPUs performing much better, with the 7500F manually overclocked to 5.25 GHz being on par with the 7600X, both being 12% faster than the 5700X 3D, even with 2 cores and 4 threads less. Impressive. As for Blender, things are more of the same, with even the stock 7500F being faster than the 5700X 3D, once again, even with less cores. That's how much difference IPC and frequency make here. and of course with the 7600X being 3% faster than the overclocked 7500F. But both the 7500F and 7600X are basically the same chip, just with different binning. Cinebench R24 is the right benchmark if we want to compare single and multi-core performances across the board. And you can immediately see that even though the 7000 series CPUs have 2 cores and 4 threads less, they outperform the older 5700X 3D here, with the overclocked 7500F, for example, being 31% faster in single core and 8% faster in multi-core, which also shows how much the older 5700X 3D would benefit from higher frequencies. And to finalize, we have 7-zip, and the results are actually interesting here. For compression and decompression, it seems the number of cores and threads are still more relevant than the rest, as the 5700X 3D is still the faster CPU. In decompression, of course, because one of the things Zen 4 brought is better compression performance, as even though the 7600X is close in decompression, it is 15% faster in compression. It is actually once again quite interesting. Let's now get to the gaming benchmarks. Starting the gaming benchmarks, we now have Assetto Corsa, as people kept asking me to test it, so here it is. And it is in gaming where the 5700X 3D shines due to the extra L3 cache, with it now being virtually on par with the other two CPUs and the 7500F gaining a whopping 13% performance increase from overclocking, which is far from small. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, things are more or less the same, with the 5700X 3D still being the fastest CPU, but not by anything relevant. It is still impressive how the 7500F matches the 7600X again, as soon as we overclock it, and if we count with the subtimings tweaking and overclocking, we get a 24% performance increase, which once again is just insane. And Valve's anti-cheat testing field now uses Source 2 engine, and that made the X3D CPUs perform much better in this game. But it seems the single-core performance still matters a lot, as even with way more cache, the 5700X 3D still gets outperformed by both Zen 4 CPUs, with the 7500F doing once again an exceptional job, being 11% faster with less cores, less threads and less L3 cache. Hogwarts Legacy is another pretty CPU demanding title, and since I tested a lot, I know that it requires a lot of cores. So I really got surprised when I saw the 5700X 3D being outperformed, once again, in this case by 6%, with the only advantage of the 7600 being the higher 1% lows. Besides that, no difference whatsoever from the 7500F. And Microsoft Flight Simulator is a game that loves 3D cache as well, and that can be seen here, as even with an overclock, the 7500F still delivers less average FPS than the 5700X 3D, with the same only losing for the 7600X that is only 3% faster in the averages, but 10% faster in the 1% lows. Overall, I mean, great results for all the CPUs here. Banishers Ghosts of New Eden is another title that really needs a good CPU to perform well, at least in the village parts. I mean, you need a 7800X 3D to achieve around 140 average FPS in this same scene. But well, we have the three CPUs once again really close to each other, with the 5700X 3D being the fastest one, and the overclocked 7500F being virtually on par with the 7600X, which is really awesome to see. But once again, it needed that manual overclock to gain the 8% performance it needed to be on par with the other two CPUs. But well, at least we have the option to do it, and it is quite simple actually. Hitman 3 is one of the most interesting titles to test due to the heavy physics the game presents in some parts of the benchmark. One more time, the 5700X 3D does an outstanding job, performing better than the 7500F and only slightly below the 7600F. I have to state though that both the 7500F and 7600X deliver higher 1% lows. That might be due to higher single core performance or simply because of DDR5. Who knows? And Starfield really surprised me. In here I don't really know what to think because I know Starfield loves a lot of CPU cores to perform well, at least it needs a lot of CPU cores to perform well, but I also know that it likes cache and RAM. And in this case we have the 5700X3D, a CPU with more cores, more cache, but with less frequency and using DDR4. And we have the CPU performing better than the other 6 cores 12 thread Zen 4 CPUs, but with lower 1% lows. And since the CPU has more cores as well, the 1% lows should be higher. So that leaves me with DDR4 versus DDR5 differences in terms of bandwidth. Maybe that's what's causing the difference. And like Starfield, The Last of Us can stress your CPU a lot, with a 6 cores 12 threaded CPU easily going up to 90% usage or more in a CPU bound scenario with a card such as the 7900 XTX. And yet, the 5700X3D is just left in the dust, with even the 7500F being 10% faster on average and 37% faster in the 1% lows. Maybe this game uses some newer instructions or something, and that's why the Zen 4 CPUs perform better. And even the completely standard 7500F matches the 5700X3D. I mean, really interesting results here. As for Far Cry 6, the game doesn't really take a huge toll on the CPU. It is CPU dependent, but not CPU heavy, if you know what I mean. And even with this game performing almost 30% better on the 5700X3D versus the normal 5700X, the Zen 4 CPUs are simply faster in terms of averages and 1% lows, with the 7500F once again proving what a massive deal it is, especially when manually tweaked. As for League of Legends, it uses an old game engine, and that usually translates to not being able to properly make use of the extra L3 cache. Which is the case. In this game, the 5700X3D is completely stomped by the other two CPUs, with the 7500F once again performing on par with the 7600X, delivering only slightly lower 1% lows, and percentage-wise, the 7600X is 47% faster than the 5700X3D, which is definitely something to take in consideration for League of Legends players. 47% faster. Diving into Spider-Man Remastered, things turn around, and the 5700X3D is now the best performer, being 18% faster than the 7500F and 9% faster than the 7600X. It still delivers less FPS in the 1% lows, but I believe that is the DDR4 versus DDR5 difference in this game. And as for the ray tracing results, well, they're pretty even actually, way more than I was expecting, with the 7600X being slower than the 5700X3D at stock, but as soon as we used the improved subtimings with a basic tutorial from Buildzoid, it increased to 127 FPS, making it slightly faster than the 5700X3D. Total Warhammer is one of those games people asked me to test, so I did, and it happens I get GPU bottlenecked with the most higher tier CPUs. Which is the case here it seems, with all CPUs performing exactly the same on average, but with the 1% lows telling a different story, with once again the 7000 series CPUs delivering higher numbers that translate to a smoother gameplay. And finally with the averages. The 5700X3D with 3200 MHz is the base performance, while the same but with 3600 MHz is only 2% faster. And yet the 7600X is 10 to 12% faster in the games we tested, as the static OC to 5.4 GHz can deliver another 2% increase. And considering it has less cores and threads, doesn't feature infinity cache and is cheaper, CPU versus CPU only, it is actually an interesting result. And even more interesting is the 7500F that can be bought for around $160, almost $70 less than the 5700X3D, and still performs up to 8% faster in case you want to take that little time to tweak it, which is just awesome. Even if we consider the absolute stock results, it still delivers 94% of the 5700X3D's performance, while consuming less power and being cheaper CPU versus CPU. And talking about power consumption, we have now the power draw results when running Cinebench, where we can see that the static overclock on the 7600X delivers higher performance, of course, but also delivers higher idle and single core power draw, while decreasing the multi-core power draw as well, so I guess it is a trade. As for the 7500F, it has a locked power limit, so overclocking it makes it consume way more power in all scenarios, which is quite expected as the performance increase in some scenarios is also quite substantial. As for the idle power draw, well, the 5700X 3D is the most efficient of the three, of course, consuming only 21 watts, followed by the 24 watts on the 7500F stock. And the most important thing that I cannot show you here, sadly, are the CPU temperatures, as I don't have AC at home to prevent the room temperatures from floating. But that's actually the biggest gain with the 7000 series when we're talking about static overclocking. The 7600, for example, the 7600X, had a slight increase in performance and power draw overall, but the temperatures got much lower and more stable. And even the 7500F got pretty nice temperatures, even with an ambient temperature of 24 degrees. But well, it is what it is. Let's move to the final thoughts. And well, I do believe that you guys were at least a bit surprised the same way I was with the 7000 series CPUs. Even though they have less cores and less threads, we're talking about 6 cores, 12 threads versus 8 cores, 16 threads on the 5700X 3D, they also have way less L3 cache, but they have more IPC and more frequency, and as we saw even in that scenario, they are overall faster in gaming, where the L3 cache actually makes or plays a major role, and even there, both the 7500F and the 7600X were slightly faster than the 5700X 3D. And if we take in consideration the platform costs, if you're getting a cheaper build, why not build a new one with an AM5 motherboard that will let you upgrade your CPU in the future for a way stronger one. So if you're making a new build, the 7500F is the way to go, because you get a way more affordable CPU, and at the same time you can overclock it and nearly match the 7600X performance, which is what you want for the cheapest price that you can get or that you can buy it at. What I mean is that you can get a really affordable CPU that will perform the same as the 7600X more or less, then when tweaked will perform better than the 5700X 3D that is, let's say, $70 more expensive. So that's a massive deal, and those $70 can go, for example, into an AM5 motherboard, and you will still have an overall better or equal CPU in terms of gaming and productivity compared to the 5700X 3D, while having the option to later upgrade to, let's say, 8000, 9000 CPUs, or maybe even the 10K CPUs if that's even going to be their name. So you have future-proof while getting almost the same platform costs, unless you're going to a really old AM4 motherboard or really cheap AM4 motherboard, but overall it will be more or less the same. The Ryzen 5 7500F is the best CPU that you can get right now for the price. It's unbeatable. For people making new computers, assembling new builds, the 7500F and the 7600 Non-X are the best options you can get for this price. But if you already have an AM4 system and you just want, let's say, a cheap upgrade that will still provide you very good FPS numbers, then the 5700X 3D is, well, what you want. Otherwise, go with a 7500F, 7600 Non-X or 7600X. That's my opinion, because as you saw in both gaming and productivity, they're quite good. And well guys, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share this video, as that really helps a lot. Don't forget to leave your comment in the comment section and let me know what you think about the productivity results, the gaming benchmarks, because I'm also and always looking to improve. That's why I added, for example, Assetto Corsa, and that's why I started making productivity benchmarks. And I can also tell you that the next GPU benchmarks will also include productivity ones instead of just the gaming side. I will just remove the upscaler, which doesn't really make sense for now, or at least now. I will keep the rasterization, ray tracing, and then, or before that, productivity benchmarks like Blender, Premiere as well, some AI benchmarks too. It will be different and interesting, I guess. Thank you very much once again, and see you in the next video, guys. Cheers.